My story starts off only a few years ago, with me being a single woman that had literally just turned 21 and fresh off the tails of a relationship that I'd been in since I was 17. A relationship that I honestly thought was going to be the one, with a guy that I thought I was going to get married to. Unfortunately, after 3.5 years, he dropped a bombshell that he wanted to move to Texas to attend college. We live in the Northwest, and I couldn't leave my family behind like that, so yeah, things kind of fell apart the day he decided to leave. That's not what this story is about, and he was a great guy. No, this story is about a guy I met not long after that breakup, a guy that I wish would have just stayed part of the background. After my last boyfriend left, I fell into a really hard depression, and I would go as far as calling myself vulnerable. I had loved him. He was great, and he just got up and left me. I know now that he was simply thinking about his future, and that I should have been happy for him, but it was my first serious relationship. It had been several years, and I was hit hard by it. Because of that, my sister decided that she could help me out of my slump by talking me into signing up for dating apps. I was incredibly hesitant at first, but she was very pushy and convincing. She had actually had a lot of luck when she signed up for the first one that she was pushing me onto. She had actually met my brother-in-law on it, and they were super happy. Because of this, she had assumed that I too would find a miracle if I just logged in and swiped on the right guy. I didn't foresee that being a thing that would happen, but you never know, right? I did as she said. I signed up for the same app that she signed up for. She showed me how to do everything, though what more is there to it than look at a profile and swipe? After a few days, I actually found a guy that seemed like he and I would get along. His listed interests were similar to mine, and after we had chatted a bit, he seemed like he was a legitimately good guy. We set up a time for us to go out and get dinner at a local bar and grill. When we met, he looked just like the picture, and we talked about all the things that we had in common. I was expecting a catfish, but I honestly was surprised at how much like his profile he actually was. We had a great night chatting about nothing, and we enjoyed our moderately priced dinner together. I thought that he and I actually had something good going, and I was ready for that second date to happen. Then, the next morning, I got a text from him that was absolutely out of nowhere. He said that he had an awesome time and that he seriously liked me, but then mentioned that he wasn't ready for a relationship and didn't see us being anything more than friends. I was a bit annoyed with the whole thing. I liked the guy and thought he was going to be a possible candidate for a relationship, but hey, if he's not ready, he's not ready. I told him that was fine and then repeated his sentiment that I would love to be friends and hang out still. But that was where I kind of expected it to all end, but it didn't. After basically telling me that he didn't want to be anything more than friends, he started texting me non-stop. He would message me every morning and say good morning, which was cute at first, but quickly got annoying when it was literally at the same time every day. Plus, again, we were just friends. He made it clear he didn't want anything else. I was a bit crass with him one of the mornings. Basically, I told him that while it was nice to get a good morning, he didn't have to text me every single day. He said it was all right and apologized. Then he started calling me frequently. It got to a point where I would ignore his calls and let them go to voicemail, which made it even more annoying because he would leave a voicemail each time and then would call back within 10 minutes. The times I would answer, he would tell me that he was thinking of me and wanted to know how I was doing. It just started to feel really weird. He broke it off with me, and now he was being the obsessive one. After a while, I'd had it. I told him that he needed to back off. He didn't want to be anything more than friends, then we would just be friends. But friends didn't bother each other constantly. He took that a little hard, but then said that he would leave me alone and apologized. He said that he was in a weird place and that he didn't mean to annoy me or cause me any issues. This was the last time we spoke for quite a while, which I took to mean that he was done with me. Oh, how wrong I was. There was one day that I had come home from work to find my room a mess. Everything was a disaster. My clothes were strewn everywhere, my papers for class. It was like someone had gone into my room and was looking for something very specific, but had no idea where it was, so they just threw everything around in a hectic mess. I brought this up to my roommate and she said that she hadn't been home all day and that she hadn't gone in my room. I believed her. She wasn't the type to go through my things or lie. She called her dad for a suggestion on what we should do, and he had us walk through the main things, check for anything missing, make sure everything is locked, tell the landlord. We did everything he told us to, and the landlord actually made a suggestion, get a camera and point it in the hallways. This actually was an idea that I liked, so the next day I went out and bought a Nest camera, and I set it up in the living room to point down the hallway toward where the bedrooms were. There was nothing for the longest time, and I thought that maybe it was just a one-time thing, until about 2 weeks later. I got notified that there was motion in the hallways while I was out at a Starbucks with my roommate. We were both there, the landlord hadn't scheduled maintenance, and no one else had a key. I opened the app to see what it was, and wouldn't you know it, there's the guy I met on the dating app, opening my roommate's door and walking through the hallway into my bedroom. She immediately called her dad. He told us to meet him there. We were just down the street, so we got there a moment or two before him. He showed up with his sidearm ready and told us to call the cops and to not come in unless he said to. I was a bit nervous about this whole situation. There was a guy that I thought was all right less than 2 months ago sneaking through our place. My roommate's dad was ready to shoot him if he had to. She was calling the cop, and I was just kind of standing there, ready for all hell to break loose. Thankfully, it didn't. At least not how I anticipated. After a few moments of shouting inside, her dad yelling for this guy to get on the ground, he actually hollered out at the window for me to come inside, so I did. When I got in my room, I saw her dad pinning the guy to the ground and him wearing my underwear. I just kind of stood there, my mouth wide open, my mind trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Her dad looked up at me and said something like, "I'm going to guess he's not supposed to be in here." I told him no, and I had to leave before I started to laugh my backhand off. The police showed up and let him put his clothes back on, but he was charged for breaking and entering. Come to find out, he had actually done this a few times, and we didn't notice because he decided to make a disaster of my room when I told him that I didn't want to talk to him anymore. My roommate, in her infinite wisdom, had taken up smoking but didn't want me to know, so she left her window unlocked and was blowing the smoke outside. Because the window was unlocked and we were ground level, he had found an easy access point so long as she wasn't home. I have no idea what to say about him wearing my underwear, other than he had a really unhealthy obsession with me. This was my one and only stalker, and my only time ever using a dating app. After this, I kind of swore off dating for a while. Someday I'll find someone for me, but until then, Mr. I'm going to break in and wear your underwear, let's not meet again. This took place in a little town close to the border of Alabama and Georgia. I've moved since then because there wasn't much in that area. To put it simply, for entertainment, you had the grocery store, a bowling alley, and town gossip. Even around my age of about 12 or so, the gossip was definitely more exciting. The older people with their stupid leagues pretty much took over the bowling alley anyways. So my family lived in a small 3-bedroom house with my parents, me, my twin brother, and our older sister. We were never really the ones being talked about unless something happened at my dad's job. He was a cop. Otherwise, we were usually the ones people told everything to. Some stuff our parents tried to keep us out of, but we typically found out by overhearing them or from the rumors even at school. Seriously, that was all we really had going around here. This story involved a house and a couple that lived about 2 houses down and across the street from us. It was a man and a woman. For simplicity, I will call them Bonnie and Bill. I'm not sure if they were married or just together, but thankfully, I never saw any kids over there. I have never seen 2 people argue so much in my life. I think they've got Jerry Springer beat. The 3 of us kids would walk to the bus stop, which was in their direction, and sometimes he would be leaving and you could hear them hollering as he left. Bill would usually proceed to burn out from the driveway, so my sister would always harp on us to make sure we didn't walk too close to the street, not knowing what he could possibly do. While outside playing in the front yard, sometimes we would be interrupted as we could hear them screaming at each other. We would all run to the fence and watch, and we weren't the only ones. When Mrs. Sampson was outside in her garden, she would pause and walk over by the street to see what was going on too. Within a few minutes, anyone that was outside was now looking down there, waiting to see or hear something worth talking about for a few days. One of the fights got pretty intense as I had been riding my bike with one of my friends around the block when I saw Bonnie angrily carrying handfuls of stuff and throwing it out on the corner. We slowed down to see what it was and noticed it was mostly clothes. I saw one of the plug-in razors and a small portable radio that was smashed, like it had been thrown, dropped, or crushed. Bonnie noticed us looking and told us we were free to take whatever we wanted, all while still talking to herself and randomly screaming. We didn't dare touch any of it because, just as I expected, Bill came flying around the corner in his car and stormed over to grab his stuff and bring it back inside. Then the argument ensued again. This was pretty much the norm for these 2. The cops were occasionally called, and I think most of them my dad ended up on. So we would always hear him talking to my mom about what happened. They would argue about the silliest things, from how dinner was made wrong, how we laughed at something she didn't like. They thought the other one was having an affair, or maybe they just woke up in a bad mood. It was crazy, but I just figured it was 2 people that probably shouldn't be together and would be better off working on themselves. And one day, I assumed that's finally what they did. We heard them arguing again on our way to the bus stop, and when we got home that afternoon, it was quiet and Bill's car was gone. Again, we just assumed he left to cool off. The next day, his car still wasn't there, and the next day, and the next day. Rumors were that he finally got tired of her or each other and they split. Bonnie even tried giving away some of Bill's stuff to people. When we were at the bus stop, she hollered for us and said we could have whatever we wanted. She had haphazardly thrown a bunch of stuff in the bed of her truck and told us to take whatever. We all politely declined, but then she tossed me a pack of baseball cards. I've collected them for years, and I was a kid, so it was pretty hard to say no to them. That night, I started going through them and showed my dad what I got. He wasn't too thrilled with the idea of me having these cards, so I reluctantly handed them over, and as far as I know, he gave them back to her. It was probably about 2 weeks or so where it was pretty silent around the neighborhood. We rarely saw her, and she started putting stuff on the windows to block anyone or anything from seeing through it. She had newspapers and plain white paper all over, even on the small etched glass windows on the door. Then there was a new car that showed up at the house, being driven by a slightly older lady. I, of course, didn't notice until we heard the familiar sounds of screaming. So we did what any of us would and went to check it out. The only thing I remember hearing from that conversation was Bonnie yelling things like, "Get off my property, leave me alone," and the new lady talking about calling the cops or reporting something. My dad went out there to see what was going on, which resulted in the lady leaving and Bonnie telling my dad to leave too and storming off back inside. Then, being nosy, we heard my dad talking to my mom and some of his friends about it a few days later. I guess the new lady was Bill's sister, and she hadn't heard from him in about 2 weeks, so she came over looking for him. From what he found out, they had an argument. He left and never returned. She said he called her once saying he was moving to Florida, didn't want any of his stuff, and would never come back, which is why she wanted to just get rid of all of his crap. That was really the last we ever heard about him. Apparently, over time, his sister still came around looking for him and asking questions, but since he was an adult and there were no obvious signs of foul play, they couldn't really do much. So, fast forward, all 3 of us kids have graduated and moved out of that town. My parents still live there, but my dad has since retired a little earlier due to a bad accident messing up his back. We've all pretty much forgotten about the situation and moved on with our lives. It was probably around 2008. Us kids were visiting our parents for a little get-together. I think it was Labor Day weekend or something. At some point in time, we started seeing a few cop cars and detectives, according to my dad, showing up at Bonnie and Bill's house. They hadn't seen Bonnie for the last 6 months to a year, and it was assumed that the house was abandoned, especially due to what we know as the housing crash around the same time. It was entirely possible. A new couple had bought the house, and they considered themselves house flippers. We were all standing outside like old times, trying to see what was going on. My dad decided to walk down there, cane and all, to see if he could figure out what happened. One of his friends was there and was more than willing to fill him in since he was familiar with the previous owners. And of course, now that we were adults, my dad was willing to share the details with us. The new owners went to complete the basement since part of it was just dirt or loose gravel. There was a weird spot that had concrete pretty much poured over it, but it wasn't leveled or smoothed out, so you could pretty much stick your foot or hand under it and lift it right off the ground. This was exactly what the new owners did. Curious as to why that was there with the soft ground underneath, they kept digging and, well, they got their answer. They found human remains. So they immediately called the cops to report it, and they brought them all out to investigate. We wouldn't find out more until after us kids left, but the local newspaper reported it and was able to identify them as Bill. My dad told us the remains had a fractured jaw and skull, so now it's rumored that Bonnie was the cause of it all. The problem is, Bonnie is now gone, and no one knows where she is, or hell, if she's even still alive. So while I didn't see or witness anything, I was living on the same block of a potential killer. The same block where a man died and was left in this makeshift grave. I was given some of his property. This creeped me out and still does. She never did anything violent towards any of us kids, but it was still a thought in my mind. We got close enough to her windows to see what she had covering them, but Would she have tried to do something to us if she caught us? Would she have done something if the sister pushed her luck? It was crazy. This is stuff you just hear about in the news or on some true crime TV show, but I lived it. So there's my small town story. I know this can happen in any town to anyone, but it's surreal when it's truly that close to home. I have a bit of an off-kilter story that kind of teeters on the edge of a stalker story, but also just a generalized creepy story. This actually took place in 2020 and is one of those things that scare the hell out of me, but is kind of a bit of an unsolved mystery for me. For the record, my wife and I are in our mid-20s. I'm 26 and she's 24. We have a 4-year-old daughter named Angel. Angel is a super sweet and trusting little girl, and she thinks that everyone is her friend. On top of that, she's also not shy whatsoever and wants to have every conversation with everyone in the world. She's also super imaginative and talks to imaginary friends as well as her stuffies all the time, so it's not a big deal to hear her talk when there's no one else in the room. Like I said, this was back in 2020, a time where we were all going a little stir crazy, I like to think. I was home from work and my wife was a nurse, so she was working hours that were absolutely insane. I did my best to pick up all the slack at home while she was working 60 hours a week and basically not sleeping whatsoever. Because we were both super busy, we unfortunately had to rely on the small TV in Angel's room to keep her occupied, which, thankfully, there were tons of cartoons on DVD that we had, and she knew how to work the player. This meant that, again, talking coming from her room would be expected, as it could be her playing, her watching a cartoon, or her talking to the cartoon. She's a chatty kid. One night, I think it was in August, I was cleaning up the house and trying to get dinner ready to go when I walked upstairs and heard Angel talking. The conversation seemed pretty innocent. She was explaining the plot to the show that she was watching, some show about little kids being superheroes and saving the day from minor things that really don't require a hero. I don't really remember much beyond that, just hearing her talk about the characters and how strong they were. I thought it was cute, and that was that. I went back downstairs and went back to finishing up dinner. When it was done, I went back upstairs to go and get her so she could eat, and then we could get her ready to take a bath and head to bed. I opened her door to see her standing on her bed and facing out her window, which was at this point wide open. Upon seeing it, I was a bit taken aback. She's not supposed to open that window, and she knows it. Then there's the part of who the hell is she talking to? When I opened the door and saw it, I immediately raised my tone and asked who she was talking to. Wasn't trying to scare her, but something was up here. She turned to me quickly and said, "Sorry, Daddy." I again asked who she was talking to as I stepped forward toward the window. I looked out into the yard and sure enough, I saw a grown man running through the backyard and jumping my fence. My instinct was to run outside and chase him, but I snapped back to the realization that I had a 4-year-old I needed to take care of and a very tired wife that was about to be home. I grabbed Angel and took her downstairs to the dinner table, and I asked her again who that man was. She said his name was Dave and that he was our neighbor. We didn't have a neighbor named Dave, at least not an immediate neighbor with that name. I then asked her a few more leading questions, and I think I may have scared her because she started crying and asking if she was in trouble. I told her that she wasn't, but I needed her to tell me what they were talking about. She told me that they were talking about her cartoon show, that they talked about her toys. She told him that her mom was a doctor, she's a nurse, but to a 4-year-old they're pretty much the same, and that I worked for the government. I asked her what he had talked to her about, and she said that he told her about his daughter and that they were the same age, and he asked her if she wanted to come meet her. This was a terrifying thought, because I know for a fact Angel said yes to that question, and that guy had probably gained her trust. Then she dropped an even worse bombshell. She told me that the last time he came by, he showed her a picture of his horse and asked if she liked horses. It was the statement, "the last time," that threw me off hard. I asked her if he'd been there before, and she told me that he had been coming by a lot over the past week. This guy had been developing a rapport with my daughter, gaining her trust, showing her things she liked, and telling her that he had a daughter that she could be friends with, all over around a week. And the whole time, I was home, none the wiser. This guy was basically grooming my daughter into trusting him with me less than 200 feet away. That night, I had Angel sleep in our bed with my wife, and I slept on the couch. That weekend, I actually went out and got some security cameras for the exterior of the house, just in case he ever came back, and I made sure the lock on that window was connected better and that she couldn't undo it anymore. Thankfully, this guy never came back, and we never saw him again. I'm still petrified at the thoughts of what could have happened, and I'm just thankful it didn't go any further, and that I happened to walk in at the exact moment that I did. My friends and I often went camping in the summer in a remote place in Kentucky. It was a small, unknown area that you could easily miss, especially if you're not looking for it. This was great for us because that meant there was never anyone around to bother us and throw off our fun. Sometimes we'd invite a new person or our partners to join us, but that was it. It was supposed to be for new homes, but after cutting down some of the trees, they ended up leaving the area untouched and never put in any houses. Including myself and my girlfriend Robin, there were going to be 6 people there for this weekend. I wanted some time alone with Robin, so we decided to stay an extra day or 2 after they left. Once we got there and got all settled, everyone started drinking and being stupid. It was a great time, but Robin wasn't one for the great outdoors. She wanted to join and be with me, which was sweet, but she couldn't stand the bugs. She didn't like the idea of sleeping in a tent on just blankets, and she definitely didn't like that there were no restrooms nearby. But she was a trooper. She tried her best to have a good time, and I think she did once she started getting a little buzzed. The first night was great, other than Robin waking up to every sound and movement. The next day was fine as well, just sitting around drinking and just hanging out. It's nice not having any expectations or errands to run, and just being able to kick back, eat, and sleep at your leisure. However, later that evening, while we were all talking and having a good time, Robin started looking around and staring hard into the darkness. After her doing this a few times, I asked her what was going on. She said she felt like someone was watching us. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just her starting to get paranoid with it getting darker. She shrugged it off at first too, but then I started seeing her go right back to it. I asked her again if there was something she actually saw, and she again said no, but just felt uneasy. I suggested maybe we should head to bed early, thinking maybe it would help too, which she didn't hesitate, and we headed off to our tent. We laid there and I started drifting while she was reading a book. I'm not sure how long I was out, but at one point, she started shaking my arm, trying to wake me up. When I tried to ask her what, she put a finger to her mouth, telling me to be quiet and listen. I sat there quietly, hearing only my friend's radio at first. When I mentioned this, Robin said, "The footsteps." So I again listened when I finally started hearing what sounded like slow, in-pattern footsteps. I tried telling her it was probably one of the others walking around drunk or trying to go to the bathroom. So to calm her down and ease her tension, I made a comment out loud to the effect of, "Don't be going over here by our tent," and smirked looking at Robin. She didn't find it very funny, and neither did the person by our tent by the sound of the groan I heard. Before I could respond though, one of my friends hollered back asking what I was talking about. I asked who was by my tent, and they said they were the only ones awake. Seeing Robin's freaked out face, I got out of the tent to see who was messing with us. That's when I confirmed my friend was right. He started getting out of his tent too, and we both looked over behind my tent. To my shock, it was an older guy. He had long matted hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in years. His face was covered in what looked like dirt and scabs, wearing boxers, a t-shirt, and slippers. Again, this was a remote area. There aren't any businesses or homes nearby, so I have no idea where this guy came from. Not knowing what to do, I just looked at him and said, hello? The man would not make direct eye contact. He always looked around me or at the ground. He also never responded. So instead, I asked, "How did you get here?" By now, Robin came out of the tent and gasped at the sight of this man. This time, he did respond, but not in English. Unfortunately, I don't know any other language, but I can at least tell if it was Spanish or French, and it was neither of those. I asked if he knew English, and again, he just mumbled something in a different language. Robin then asked him if he needed help, and she offered to call 911. When she said this, he kept shaking his head and saying no, 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 over and over as he started walking away and holding his side. Robin tried shouting out to him, but he kept saying no and said something else and walked away into the night. I thought it was definitely bizarre and had no idea how this man in his condition had even gotten there. She said we should probably call someone in case he got out from somewhere and had something wrong with him. My friend didn't like this idea since we could get in trouble for trespassing. We had all been drinking, so there was no way we were safe to even drive. So I calmed Robin down and told her we'll just leave with them tomorrow instead of staying longer and just call the police on our way out so they can come look for him, to which she agreed. The next morning, we got up, had a little breakfast, and started packing to head home. The rest of the group was taking a bit longer to leave, but Robin was anxious to see if she could find this guy before we left. So we started driving around to see if we could find him, but no luck. The area wasn't that big, but we still didn't see him around. Thinking he probably wandered off somewhere else, Robin was upset but understood there wasn't anything else we could do. So we headed back over to our friends and helped as the last of them left. Nothing came of the situation until a few days later. Robin had come over to my place and immediately pulled up a news article. It was about a body that was found close to where we were camping. It was an older guy in his 60s that had been stabbed and bled out. I don't remember the name anymore, but what I do remember was that he was Swedish. Then they also showed a picture of the victim. It was the same guy we saw while camping, just in better health. That also explained the different language he was speaking. It was pretty heartbreaking. This guy was standing right in front of us, probably holding his side from the stabbing, and he didn't want us to call the police. Why? And to top it all off, the suspect was still wanted. Was the killer nearby? Did he walk by like this guy did while we were asleep? Robin ended up going to the police and talking to them. I couldn't blame her. She has too kind of a heart, which made it even worse on her, knowing we didn't do anything. I don't know if they ever caught the suspect, but I sure hope so, for everyone's safety and so that man can be at peace. I babysat for most of my teenage years. I still occasionally do it for people I'm close with and I know, but it was one of the easiest ways to make money, in my opinion. However, there are some weird people out there, adults and kids alike, which after a while get tiring to deal with. There were definitely a few that I remember that really stood out, but one I'd specifically like to share with you now. Now, this happened quite some time ago, back when Craigslist was popular and you didn't have to worry about being kidnapped or robbed. I used to post my babysitting services there. I got a response from someone to watch their kid that lived a few blocks over. They called and we set up a time to meet and basically interview each other. When I went over there, the house was kind of a mess, from boxes everywhere, carpet being ripped up, walls painted, things like that. They said they were renovating because it used to belong to the dad's parents. His mother passed away and his dad was in a nursing home, so they got the house or something like that, and they were trying to make it more modernized. That being said, they thought they would save some money by getting a babysitter instead of a daycare. It was fine by me. They basically set up the back living room and the bedrooms so we had places to be in the home that were safe. Sometimes I watched their son Caleb while they were away. Sometimes they asked me to watch them while they were getting supplies delivered, appliances put in, etc. Caleb was around 5, I believe, when I started. He was talking but still had trouble making full sentences. Caleb's room was the second room in the hallway, right after the bathroom, so they had a baby monitor in his room, so that way I could sit in the living room and watch TV or something if he was playing. I could hear him mumble to himself and play at times, but one time I started hearing him really getting into a conversation. I first just thought he was deep into playing with his toys or something and let it go. Then I heard him laugh and talk again, so I started listening closer. I heard him talking about himself. He said, "I'm 5. I like chips. I like purple. Daddy made it." Little things like that, but I never heard him say something on the other side. Curious, I went to his room to see what was going on. I saw him sitting on the floor, lining up all his toys, and he continued to talk as he looked over in the corner of his room, which worried me, so I went in all the way. I asked what was going on, and he said he was playing with his friend. I questioned about his friend, and he said the wet man. I thought I misheard him at first and asked him maybe white man, and he corrected me saying wet man. Weird, but I asked why he was wet, and he said he didn't know, but he thought it was funny because he had his clothes on still. I was a little weirded out, so I decided to ask Caleb to watch a movie in the living room with me, and he did. This actually occurred a few times, but was making me more curious as to what he was talking about or seeing. I thought his parents seemed to be pretty cool, so I asked them if they believed in ghosts one time when we were eating. The dad laughed and didn't really answer, but the mom said she believed they existed but never experienced anything, and told them about Caleb's friend. While the mom thought it was interesting, the dad actually lost all color and got quiet. I honestly thought he was mad at me and quickly started apologizing when he said I was fine. I remember they looked at each other and the dad said, "Clyde," and the mom's face then matched his. They then told me about how his great-grandfather had a heart attack in the bath and drowned in it. He showed me a picture of him and everything. It was creepy. Was he seeing his dead great-great-grandfather then? In case anyone was curious, I continued to babysit him for a few years and got pretty close to the family. And the mom freaked out on me one time when I came over, saying they were going through pictures and they showed one of Clyde, and he stopped and exclaimed, "That's the wet man." So, yep, he definitely saw him. The visits from Clyde stopped happening after a while from what I've witnessed and what they've told me, but he also doesn't remember it either. Definitely one of the most memorable babysitting experiences. Well, here we are again, friends, at the end of another true scary story collection. And geez, what a collection. Between a missing person, stalkers, kids seeing both real people and ghosts. I don't know which one's worse. I know I've mentioned that before. A ghost or a real person, especially when it comes to a kid. Their imaginations are crazy. So if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. You can also leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the video, if you had a favorite one, or even what is your favorite animal. But with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. And until next time, take care.